Baseball is America's game, yet unlike basketball or football, it has never crowned a single, undisputed king. Michael Jordan is universally recognized as basketball's greatest. Muhammad Ali is boxing's immortal icon. Tom Brady stands tall in football. But in baseball, a sport woven into the fabric of American identity, the title of greatest of all time has always been fractured, debated, and unresolved. And that is not because greatness has been absent. In fact, the man who might have claimed that throne once stood right before us, his bat as sharp as a sword, his numbers etched in eternity, and his defiance carved into legend. His name was Ted Williams. He was the last man to hit 400 in a season. He had the highest on-base percentage in history. He sacrificed nearly 5 prime years of his career to fly fighter planes in 2 wars. He walked into stadiums and bent the game to his will. Yet today, when the debate rages over Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, or Barry Bonds, Ted Williams is often an afterthought. This is the story of how the greatest pure hitter who ever lived was robbed, not by a lack of talent, but by time, by war, and by words. Baseball has always thrived on myth-making. It is a sport that does not simply record numbers, but weaves them into folklore. When fans talk about Babe Ruth, they don't just speak of his 714 home runs. They remember the cold shot, the aura, the myth of a man larger than life. When Hank Aaron surpassed Ruth, it wasn't just a statistic. It was a civil rights milestone, a man standing tall under death threats to become baseball's home run king. Yet, when it comes to Ted Williams, his story never crystallized into myth in the same way. His greatness was there, undeniable, but his narrative was fractured. He was both adored and despised, both a savior of the game and its eternal outsider. And that paradox is what makes his story so compelling. To understand Ted Williams, you have to start with the raw numbers, because they are staggering. Williams ended his career with a .344 batting average, the highest of any player whose career began after 1920. He owned the all-time record for on-base percentage at .482, meaning that for every 10 plate appearances, he reached base nearly 5 times. That statistic alone is absurd. To put it in modern perspective, the best hitters of this generation, Miguel Cabrera, Mike Trout, or Shohei Ohtani, hover around .420 in their best years. Williams sustained nearly 480 over 2 decades. His OPS, the combination of on-base percentage and slugging percentage, was second only to Babe Ruth, and his .521 home runs came despite losing nearly 5 full seasons to military service. The math of his career is an alternate universe of what could have been. Take his rookie season in 1939. At just 20 years old, Williams drove in 145 runs, a total unmatched by anyone in the last 15 years of Major League Baseball. He led the American League in total bases and walks. And he wasn't merely a contact hitter, he was a power threat from the beginning. His swing was a study in mechanics, a lesson in geometry, each angle calculated, each movement designed for maximum efficiency. Williams once said hitting was the single most difficult thing to do in sports, and he approached it like a scientist. While other players relied on instinct, he relied on dissection. He studied pitches relentlessly, memorized release points, and trained his eye to pick up the slightest variation. But the moment that sealed his legend, and paradoxically began the complications of his legacy, was the summer of 1941. That year, America was on the brink of war. Joe DiMaggio was riding his famous 56-game hitting streak, and Ted Williams was quietly chasing immortality. On the final day of the season, Williams's batting average stood at .39955, which would have been rounded up to 400 under league rules. Many players would have sat out, preserved the milestone, and let history take care of the rest. Not Williams. He insisted on playing both games of a doubleheader against the Philadelphia Athletics. He went 6 for 8, raising his average to 4 for 06. To this day, he remains the last player in Major League Baseball to hit 400 in a season. That single act captured the essence of who he was: relentless, defiant, unwilling to settle for anything less than perfection. And yet that same 1941 season also marked the beginning of his struggles with recognition. Despite leading the league in batting average, home runs, runs scored, walks, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and wins above replacement, despite being objectively the best hitter alive, he lost the Most Valuable Player award to Joe DiMaggio. Why? Because DiMaggio was a Yankee, beloved by the media, clean-cut, graceful, and blessed with a record that lent itself to myth: 56 consecutive games with a hit. The press adored DiMaggio. They distrusted and disliked Williams, and in an era when MVP voting was controlled by those very writers, personality often trumped performance. This became a recurring theme. In 1942, Williams won the Triple Crown, leading the league in batting average, home runs, and runs batted in, yet lost the MVP to Joe Gordon, another Yankee. Gordon led the league in 2 categories: strikeouts and grounding into double plays. The injustice was glaring, but it was also predictable. Williams, brash and standoffish, had made enemies in the press box. He did not tip his cap to fans. He cursed at reporters. He carried himself with arrogance, and he made no effort to hide it. And the press punished him by withholding the hardware that could have immortalized his career. This dynamic haunted him for the next decade. Again and again, Williams put up numbers that should have won him MVPs, and again, the awards went elsewhere. Lou Boudreau in 1948, Joe DiMaggio in 1947, Mickey Mantle later in the 1950s. The story repeated with monotonous cruelty. Williams was the best, but Williams was not loved. And in baseball, love mattered. But beyond the ballots, there was a larger tragedy unfolding. In 1943, as the Red Sox prepared for another season, Ted Williams was not in the lineup. He was in uniform, but it was military khaki, not Boston white. America had entered World War II, and Williams enlisted in the Navy, later serving as a Marine Corps pilot. He missed the 1943, 1944, and 1945 seasons. At the peak of his powers, ages 24 to 26, he was flying fighter planes instead of swinging a bat. Later, during the Korean War, he would lose large parts of the 1952 and 1953 seasons as well. In total, he sacrificed nearly 5 full years of his career to military service. The cost is impossible to quantify. Even with those lost years, he hit 521 home runs. With them, he might have approached 700, putting him in the conversation with Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron. His walk totals, already among the highest in history, would have been untouchable. He might have added 3 or 4 MVPs to his resume. But history is not kind to hypotheticals. What remains is a statistical masterpiece marred by blank pages where glory should have been written. And yet, for all his service and sacrifice, Williams was often portrayed in the media not as a hero, but as a villain. Part of this was his own doing. He could be cold, abrasive, even hostile. He spit toward booing fans. He refused to acknowledge applause. He once vowed never to tip his cap, and he kept that vow until 3 decades after retirement. In the mythology of sports, where charisma amplifies greatness, Williams chose disdain. He was no Pete Rose, no Derek Jeter, no charming rogue who could soften arrogance with a smile. He was blunt, defiant, and, to many, insufferable. Yet this is where the paradox of Ted Williams deepens. For the same man who bristled at fans and snapped at writers was also the man who, in his Hall of Fame induction speech, called for the recognition of Negro League players. In 1966, long before baseball's official reckoning with its segregated past, Williams used his platform to demand justice for Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, and countless others denied the opportunity to play in the majors. That speech helped set in motion their eventual enshrinement in Cooperstown. He donated generously to cancer research. He mentored younger players with obsessive care. He was both arrogant and generous, abrasive and compassionate. He was, above all, human. But baseball does not always honor humanity. It honors narrative. And Williams's narrative was messy. He played his entire career in Boston, a city known for both passion and cruelty toward its athletes. He never won a World Series, and for decades, the Red Sox were defined by their drought. He was a legend without a ring, a king without a crown. In contrast, DiMaggio's Yankees collected championships, Mantle basked in the glory of October, and Ruth remained the symbol of triumph. Fair or not, fans often equate greatness with rings, and Williams had none. Still, the brilliance of his career cannot be denied. Even at age 41, in his final at-bat, he launched a home run into the seats of Fenway Park. It was a poetic conclusion to 2 decades of dominance. And true to character, he did not tip his cap. He walked into the dugout, head high, stubborn to the last moment. John Updike later wrote that "Gods do not answer letters," a line that captured the aloof divinity of Williams's career. He was above adoration, and in that refusal to bend, he both preserved his myth and limited his legacy. What makes his story particularly haunting is how different history might look with just a few changes. If he had not lost those 5 seasons to war, if he had been more charming with the press, if he had just 2 or 3 more MVPs on his shelf, if the Red Sox had broken their curse while he still wore number 9. In that alternate history, Ted Williams would not just be remembered as the greatest hitter, he would be remembered as the greatest player, period. The GOAT. Even without those what-ifs, Williams's accomplishments stand alone. Consider this. From 1939 to 1960, through wars, slumps, injuries, and age, he never once stopped being among the best hitters in baseball. His longevity rivaled the durability of Hank Aaron, his dominance rivaled Babe Ruth, and his science of hitting prefigured the analytics-driven game we see today. Modern players study launch angle and exit velocity. Williams was thinking about those concepts decades before TrackMan existed. He dissected hitting in a way that made him not just a player, but a prophet. And yet, what history remembers most often is not just the numbers, but the narrative. Ted Williams was robbed by war, robbed by media bias, robbed by his own stubbornness. He was the greatest hitter who ever lived, but he was denied the crown of GOAT by forces beyond his control and flaws within his character. That tension is what makes his story timeless. In the end, the legacy of Ted Williams is not a tragedy. It is a lesson. Greatness alone does not guarantee immortality. Numbers may be written in record books, but it is the stories we tell, the myths we shape, that decide who sits on the throne of history. Williams gave us brilliance unmatched, but he also gave us defiance, pride, and the cost of refusing to play the game outside the foul lines. He was a warrior in war and in sport, a man who never settled for less than perfection, yet never softened his edges enough to be universally loved. And maybe that is why his story matters even more today. In a world obsessed with branding, image, and charm, Ted Williams stands as a reminder that true greatness can be raw, unfiltered, and flawed. He was the splendid splinter, thin, unassuming, but unbreakable. He was the last 400 hitter, the fighter pilot who gave up his prime, the man who spoke up for those denied justice, and the legend who walked away without tipping his cap. Ted Williams may not hold baseball's GOAT crown, but he remains its purest hitter, its eternal paradox, and perhaps its most human god.